Before we jump into the talk, let me introduce myself. My name is Elena, and I'm currently art director at Larian Studios. But previously, I worked as a lead character artist on Baldur's Gate 3. And I've been at Larian for quite some time, a bit more than 8 years now, since 2016. I started as an intern and worked my way up to the art director. Let me introduce Larian Studios as well for those of you who are unfamiliar with the company. Larian Studios made Baldur's Gate 3. However, Baldur's Gate 3 is owned by Wizards of the Coast, so we worked on the IP. And Larian Studios at present has 7 studios around the world and 450 plus developers. We just opened the studio in Warsaw. That's since the release of BG3. So all of the other 6 studios did work on the project, and we cooperated all together. So what are we going to talk today about? I'm going to lead you through some of the creation process, focusing on character art and character creation. And we're going to talk about our leaping graphics and how did we do it. So on the left, you could see probably, it wasn't the first character that we made. It was still kind of mid pre-production. So that's what we started with. And on the right is a character, an NPC from the game on release. So how did we do it? But also how essentially some tricks and things that we did to provide players what we call unlimited character creation. Tool set or a framework where you could create all of these characters that you can see on the screen and more. Before we start, actually, we're gonna maybe have a look at the trailer so that everyone knows how the game looks. But maybe if I can ask you to raise your hand if you played Baldur's Gate 3. So let's see the audience. Very nice, yeah, lots of hands. Very glad to see those. Okay, so for those who haven't played, here is a trailer.
Ever glimpse what you're about to see. But don't be alarmed, I'm here with you. Now, open your eyes.
So everyone got to start somewhere, and we also didn't really start from scratch because Larian worked on these types of games before. So on the top left, you could see the screenshot, a character creation screenshot from Divinity Original Sin 1, then on the right, Divinity Original Sin 2, and then finally below Baldur's Gate 3. So you could notice, you could spot that there are certain similarities. Maybe there are more similarities between DOS 1 and DOS 2, but then again, they are a bit closer together versus Baldur's Gate 3. It took us 6 years to make, so we did some improvements. But essentially, that was our base, right? So we started from what we knew by making Divinity Original Sin 2. And there were some already customization options. There were certain graphic standards that we had, that we followed. But then we figured out that we're going to use it as a base. And then we also learned a lot, right? So we learned things that we wanted to work on, we wanted to improve on, and we wanted to research. And essentially that's what we did. But having this base certainly helped us. So we already knew certain things before jumping on the project. That was our start. So you can, see that it's not really looking as what you saw in game. So, something did change. So we started with a very small team. It was 4 character artists that were working on Baldur's Gate 3 at the beginning, which we grew into 20 at the end. But essentially, we tried some things. We tried to improve graphics that we have from the Divinity Original Sin 2. We tried to make a bit of a graphic leap, and that's what we ended up with. And we weren't happy with this. So this was probably at least 6 months in the project, and we looked at it, and then we're like, yeah, I guess it's going somewhere, but it's still not there. I'm going to show you now a very exclusive video. And this was our first first cinematic dialogue. And I think that was actually probably the second proof of concept. So that's how it looked. Some of you probably are recognizing the beach. I'm sorry, the starting area.
It's where I keep my formal horns and tail, just in case we stumble across any royal balls. It's hardly important to you, is it? As Mordenkainen wrote in one of his letters from Barovia, ignorance is heartless, but it's certainly the safer option. Fine, if you insist on knowing. This box is sealed with dark, infernal magic. It's not cursed, it comes from hell itself.
And then if I fast forward a bit, I think there's going to be a moment where my character also going to... Yes, okay.
Ignorance is heartless, but it's certainly the safer option. Fine, if you insist on knowing. This box is sealed with dark, infernal magic. It's not cursed, it comes from hell itself.
All right, lovely. So, that was essentially what we started with. And we realized that we are not there, okay? But we did experiment and we did kind of learn certain things, and we realized that the direction itself is right. So we do like having cinematic dialogues, we do like showcasing our characters up close, and the narrative feels quite smooth. So we want to invest our time and effort to make it better. So we realized that some of the conclusions that we draw from the pre-production is that we need much more graphics programming support. We need to focus on improving our models. So this is the example of how Lae'zel, well, technically Lae'zel, it was one of the first Githyankis we made, looked in our engine with our mesh, and then something that we got from our cinematic that we outsourced, like the cinematic trailer that we released. And we kind of started thinking, we kind of started putting them close together and thinking, how do we get closer to what we have in our cinematic trailer? So how do we do that in-game? And then obviously investing in tools, because this is something that we learned on our previous title. Some things worked, some things didn't work. So we knew that we gotta build a new framework because we kind of suspected that the game's gonna be big and we're gonna need to cater towards large crowds and lots of characters, also highly iterative process. So we needed better tools to be able to handle that. We also invested into new technology to kind of support our modeling. We looked into photogrammetry, both for characters and environment. We scanned people, and then we used those scans not only to just work on top of, but also as a learning tool, because with a team that focused on something very stylized, it was really hard to break these habits, like the old-time habits. So the first models kind of looked very close to what we used to have in Boss 2. And then by introducing photogrammetry and getting artists' hands on how the 3D scan looks like on your screen, with your own tools and setups, it helps you kind of also look at your own mesh, hand-sculpted mesh, and think okay, so I gotta actually still work in certain areas to improve it. It basically helps you to give feedback. So that's how it looked. Also, we looked into skin texturing. So this is something that we invested a lot of times researching and building our own shader. We had skin customization before, but it was very basic, and it didn't quite work well for all of the skin shades. So essentially, we had just one texture that we overlaid color with. So it's, for example, for hair, for fair skin tones, we just ended up with lots of skin details, and then for deeper skin tones, we didn't have enough with this one texture. So we decided to build a skin texturing with multiple grayscale map that represented colors in the skin, and then blended it together with a very complex formula. So that was a test that, the proof of concept of our skin shader. So I took this image and I went to our CEO, Sven Vinke, and I gave him this image and I said, hey Sven, so we finally figured out the shader, it finally works. This is how it looks before and this is how it looks after. And then because we already were in pre-production, we made already around 40 heads by that time. So if we would go for this new shading technology, it would mean that we would need to remake all of those heads. So Sven looks at this image and he looks at it for maybe 2 minutes, and then he says, I don't see any difference. So then I started discussing, and it's like, okay, well, if we as artists think that this is worth investing, then he would basically believe us, just take our word for it, and he would just allow us to remake all of these 40 heads that were done prior. And we did that. Artists were very happy. So another thing that we decided to do, which was new, is our character editor tool. So this is a tool that we developed together with our programming and tools department, which allowed us to assemble characters from pieces. So we had more than 2,000, actually. We ended up with more than 2,000 characters in Baldur's Gate. Some of them were just characters that you didn't even talk to, so some of them were corpses, some of them were just combat characters that only appeared in certain scenarios, some of them were backup cinematic characters, but it was a huge number. And what we got to do were to kind of open each of them, dress them up, give them some hair and head, basically assemble them in this tool. So what this tool allowed us to make, so it's basically on the left, you could see different categories and actually different rigs that you could assign on the character. And we could just pre-assemble whatever character we want from those meshes. And then on the right, so this is a material panel, and material panel would expose any parameters from the meshes that are assigned to the model. So it was very versatile. It didn't restrain us, so it didn't constrain us to any fixed pipeline. So let's say one of the character could be wearing just a full body, very custom, no split whatsoever, and then another one could have separate gloves, separate boots, some belt variation. So whatever we come up with for certain cluster of characters, we could implement with that tool. So this is roughly how, how a set looks like. So you could pick from different heads, and actually a head also is constructed of certain meshes that we also reuse and might not be very custom per character. So there is obviously separate eyeballs, separate teeth that also could be different, like vampire teeth versus Githyanki teeth versus humanoid teeth. And then this is our bandit set, essentially. So that's how we decided to split it for this particular outfits. range. So you could, basically every part that you see on the screen works with every other part. So it doesn't matter which body you pick, doesn't matter which belt you pick, shoulder pads, so it works all together. And that allowed us to dress up to probably 20 or 30 bandits in the world, especially when you add on top different hairstyle, add on top different races and different skin colors. That really, really becomes versatile. So you actually, when you meet this character, you don't really immediately see that it's exactly the same outfit or exactly the same character as before. Or, like this is the same system. That's how we made our vampires as well. So what we did, we would just assemble the existing outfits, customize the colors. We would just play around with their shaders and with like some blood stains and whatnot. And this way we could support much more unique characters in the world versus if we would need to really model each of them by hand. So there were also some of the things that we learned along the way by making our racial lineup. And the amount of races that we give to the player and that you meet in the world is quite vast. So it also, kind of put a lot of workload on our artists and animators. So we gotta figure out something. So what we knew from the beginning is that if we would make all of the races playable from Player's Handbook, we would never be able to make all of them unique. So you could see like all of the races standing next to each other, and maybe some of you could spot that Dragonborn and half-orcs and like human male strong model kind of maybe look suspiciously close. Well, that's because they are on the same rig. So some of the races are fully on the same rig, like for example elves, humans, and half-elves. Well, that's obvious. It's also the same body actually, just the head is different. But then some of the less noticeable things is that Githyanki is also actually on the human rig, but we did make some adjustments to the body anatomy, to the body shape, so that they're much more slender, so that the silhouette that they appear with looks more unique on the screen. And then we walked a mile further, and these guys on the bottom right screen, I'll tell you, they're also all on the same rig, actually. So this is our strong rig. So we noticed that we could do a lot with it. We could model quite different proportions of the bodies and then keep the joints just in the same position. Since the heads all had their unique rig anyways, we weren't constrained by it. So the heads are unique, so it gives also a little bit of height difference in that regard. But between those, like if you run out of time, you could even reuse the animations from one to another. You could easily retarget. So it really served as a nice tool per se. We also reused other things, obviously. So all of the races that you see here, except Dragonborns, have also this exactly same UV sets and share certain textures, like roughness maps or certain customization textures, which is also a big deal because this is something that we weren't thinking about before. We were we had some concerns, okay, will that work? Won't that work? But yeah, it certainly. I think we couldn't do what we did without it 100%. So sharing is caring for sure. So what does production really consist of, right? So there is pre-production. And then for us, there is early access. So this is something that we did with our previous titles as well. So before actual release, there is this early access stage where we give the game to the players. We give a limited access to the game to the players. And then we get feedback from it, and we kind of test certain ideas, certain directions that we want to do with the game, and then we get back kind of play test and feedback. We see the crowd reaction, and sometimes it also helps us to navigate and give us ideas how to move forward. So pre-production is the stage where we can iterate the most, right? So pre-production is when the course of the game and the visual direction of the game can still change. So this is the first character that you've seen on my previous slides. The lady below is actually Shadowheart. So this is how she looked for a while before we modeled her. You could recognize the door behind her. So yes, that's her. And yeah, so pre-production is all about finding unique visual style, building technology, building tools, like basically establishing the team, and staying very open to changes and feedback. And then there is early access stage. So early access stage is where we still could iterate a lot, but there were already certain limits, right? So we couldn't all of a sudden just change the whole course of the game and say, well, now you're not going to go to Baldur's Gate 3, you're just going to stay in the Underdark or something. So the changes started to look more minimal, but that's really where the magic happened, I'd say. So we were 3 years in early access. This is maybe a little bit too long from what we would hoped for. But yeah, well, there was also COVID, so, you know, we did what we did. Then there were 9 patches altogether, and that basically meant that we were releasing content every 4 months. And that kind of felt really like a live service game at that stage, because every 4 months you were expected to submit something, you were expected to hide the files that are not supposed to go to the public, you were supposed to like work on the, you know, the continuous production for the big release, but also give players some updates to feel the progress that it's going somewhere. And there were smaller changes, right? So like you can see on the left and right, like basically the dove character, right? We changed the lighting, we improved the skin here and there, we improved the hair. So it's bit by bit, that's how it all comes together, right? So there is sometimes bigger changes happen, like with Carla, right? So Carla looks completely different. There were a couple of iterations on her, but sometimes it just takes small steps. That's how the character creation looked before early access, actually. So here you see a Sarian. We didn't have much back then, so we could only customize heads, hairstyles, skin, makeup, tattoos, and horns. Were planned, actually. They weren't implemented. And that's how it started. Right, so there were lots of patches. Here's all of the like breakdowns on all of the patches. There were some that were mostly technical, and then there were some that involved art as well. So we were very hands-on with those. So what did patches bring to us? What did they bring to the project? Well, one of the first artistic patches that happened was Draconic Sorcerer. And when we were making this class, designers approached us and said, well, you know, in the book, right, we need to somehow visualize the draconic scales on the skin. How can we do that? So we started to wrap our heads around it, and we realized that we would need to start applying normal maps with the scales, and then we wanted them to look nice, so we also needed them to have a metallic hues, right? So, and we needed to have a couple of options of them to support like some variety of choice to the player. So we did that, and then we were like, oh wait, that's exactly the same technology that we need to make scars customizable as well. So we threw it in because that was already needed for gameplay reasons. So we thought just like, okay, why not basically just not add another feature there for free. Barbarian patch as well was something that brought an extra customization feature to the table, because when you level up your Barbarian, you have this option to apply piercings on yourself, and there are different piercings you could pick from, piercing sets. So we thought, well, since we already implemented something like this for Barbarian, how about we make it a customization feature for players as well, and for NPCs, which we obviously did. Then the Bard patch came, and for the Bards, we were kind of already looking into some hair improvements. So we had a couple of people working hands-on on improving not only the models, but also the shading model of the hair. And what we always wanted to do is just add slightly more colors in there. So this is something that we thought would be a really good idea, specifically for bards, or like specifically to ship with bard class. And essentially, like, it brought us to having those highlights in the hair, but also to making the grain hair customizable, color customizable, because we thought that, you know, like, bards needs to look fun. So how about we just allow players to do whatever they want with their hair? Also known as hair patch. So this was also the moment where, yeah, our code department really shined and implemented some of this, like, really nice anisotropy and translucency in the hair, improved some of the rendering in our strands. So that was, yeah, the progress shots that we had. And one of the not least important thing that came out from the early access is community feedback. So throughout the early access, throughout the 3 years in early access, we listened to what players have said about our game. Kind of after each patch release, we really looked at you know, some comments online, some threads. We read what's being said. And we kind of, like, also, it gave us an idea about what do people want. And a consistent thing that stayed there were always that people want more variety in body types, shapes. So the body types wasn't something that was planned. So we calculated the effort that we need to put in, especially from the animation, like, to make the body types work, and early in the production we decided that we're not going to do it. But then the community was so persistent in asking for it that it kind of bent our priorities, really, and we managed to make it happen. So this is something that, you know, shout out to our community. It might not seem like you do a lot, or, like, you know, your comment doesn't matter, but you never know when it does. And with this one, it definitely did. Maturity and freckle slider was also something that kind of came up. And maybe it was partially from the community, maybe it was also something that we were, like, discussing in the team for a while. But it also, like, it's not like we just weren't thinking about those things, right? And then it came up somewhere, and then we're like, oh, you know, actually that's a great idea. How about we just do that? Like, we obviously check if we can do that, like, if it's plausible, possible, if we do have the tech. And if we do, we just go for it. Or more tattoos, so this was another thing, right? I think we, like, in early access we only had 16, and then we kind of thought about, okay, well, that's clearly not enough, so how do we expand this? Focus on diversity was one of the pillars for us when we were developing, and that also helped us navigate on what meshes were missing or what things we want to focus on more in the character creation. So we always wanted to give all the players enough choice to build their own character, to build their own identity. And this is something that yeah, also kind of helps us plan and helps us make the right decision, really. So diversity in our character creation means, obviously means color. So this is one of the things that we definitely focused on, making sure that there is enough color options and all of them look good. Different types of hair and heads, yeah, this one was obvious from the start. Vitiligo, something that came up as well as a feature, which we thought that would be really nice to have to represent like a wider variety of skin types. Heterochromia, of course, something that's, especially in a fantasy game, right? Like, this is something fun. And genitals and body types. So this all kind of aligned with this pillar to focus on diversity that we tried to implement. So EA versus release, right? So like, essentially, like, there were some features planned from the beginning, but they were quite a limited amount of features. And there were features that came up. So all of the features that are emerged in this list, those are features that we weren't necessarily planning to make. But we kind of knew that something's gonna come up, so we allocated enough space in the development for it. And that's what we realized works really well, because the game development process, as you all know probably, is highly iterative. So you can't know everything from the start. And you gotta have a plan, but then you gotta be prepared that this plan's gonna grow, and then how much our plan grew. So one other thing that we realized that players really are into customizing the colors, and they really like this wide selection of available colors. Adding colors was very painful, one might say, but so basically to add extra colors, you got to work with this kind of like an Excel sheet in in our toolset, in our engine, but it doesn't really work like an Excel sheet. It has very limited functionality, and sometimes artists would sit for days adding those colors one by one. But then when players, they see the amount of variety and the colors that they can pick from, it makes them really happy, and obviously it makes us feel that it's all worth it. With colors, there were also some funny things whenever we had playtesters come test in our game for probably the last half year of the production, and then we would talk to them, and then they would say, I really liked the game, I played through Act 1, it was pretty cool, I did this and I did that, but I have this one thing. I couldn't find this green shade of hair that I really wanted. And I'm like, God damn it. Okay, fine, I'm adding the green hair, or more, there were green shades. Anyhow, so how it worked for us, essentially, we were developing a feature, right? And then we were integrating it in the game pipeline, and then we were integrating it in CC. So whenever we were developing a feature, we kind of stayed on the lookout if this can be used for the players, and if it could be used for the players, we would try to implement it as a customization feature and integrate it in the character creation. It wasn't super straightforward, actually, integrating character creation. It still required support from different teams, so like coders normally. So we had to really coordinate, and we had to be very cautious of their timeline as well, because sometimes the production cycle was pretty tight, and somebody needed to work on something for the patch, and then integrating features in character creation was pushed to the release. So having all of these features and all of the production, that's essentially what it turned out into. So you could make the characters that, a lot of you, I guess, made. You could, be whoever you want to be. And generally, we are really happy to see our community making those stunning characters and then posting the screenshots online. We didn't even expect how much variety we're going to see online with all of your tabs. It really warms my heart to see all of these stunning characters. Another thing that we learned is that, during production as a whole, the change is painful. So throughout our early access and just kind of looking, also post-development, I would say, we noticed that some things we can't change, and some improvements might not be for the best. Maybe some of you know His Majesty cat that accidentally acquired a fur coat during, I think, one of the patches post-release. That happened, and then that didn't go well with community, and then they really made it clear that they want the naked cat back, which we brought back. So and on the bottom you could see how Gale evolved through our early access production, actually. So the one on the left was Gale that we started with, so the early access Gale. The one in the middle is also very exclusive, so this is something that we iterated upon because we saw that we want some improvements to the model. But then when we showed it to our internal team, We realized, so they wanted to improve Gale. All of us did, but then when we showed the improved version, they already got so used to the old one that most of them were like, yeah, I don't know, like I like this one, and then I like this one. So we didn't really, we weren't able to find a consensus, so we proposed a compromise Gale, as I call him. So that's what we ended up with, an improved Gale on the release. So overall character creation conclusions, like the secret sauce, say it, is basically a mix of artistic direction, artistic talent, tech, and collaboration. At least that that's the conclusions that we drew out of the production. We realized that we shouldn't plan or we shouldn't count on the feature, all the features being there from the beginning. We should be prepared for anything. Today we have, 5 goblins in a goblin camp, and then tomorrow we have 100. So we gotta, be prepared for anything. We learned to collaborate with other departments. Some of the character creation features definitely wouldn't happen if it wasn't for our lovely code producer, with whom we kind of need to haggle a little bit, and who really wanted some of the player features that we were suggesting, and he made it work. And then we learned to listen to feedback, right? So whether it is the community or internal feedback, we can't just live in our own bubble, right? We gotta ask people's opinion, and it should count. And we need to embrace the chaos, of course. It's very chaotic. So what's the secret sauce, right? More. Having early access in the production cycle is something that I would certainly recommend to any game developers. I think that helped us, that gave us time, that helped us kind of feel the community feedback and helped us make a better game. Allowing artistic freedom is also one of the big pillars that we operate with at Larian. We can't make character creation that's going to cater to all of the audience if we're not going to listen to all of the opinions. And me being a lead on Baldur's Gate 3 or being an art director, it doesn't matter that I might prefer oranges over apples or prefer this type of hairstyle over another. I got to listen to what people tell me, and I got to say, oh, actually, maybe indeed we don't have enough of that thing represented in our character creation. And our job is make those ideas work in our game rather than discard them. And then, of course, we need to build to iterate. Some features wouldn't even happen if we didn't. So something, for example, that came up pretty late were genital selection. And we already had so much things pre-built for it, so that for us it was like, we just stick another mesh on it, right? And then we just iterate. Like the UVs, the topology of the characters are all the same anyways, so we could support it. But if we would customly model all of the bodies and everything would be super unique in all of our playable races, we just wouldn't be able to have it. So building to iterate is definitely one of the conclusions that makes or breaks it for character art. And that was it for this presentation. Thank you very much. So now I think we have quite a bit of time for questions. So if anyone has a questions, please feel free to ask.
Hello.
Hello, yes.
Thank you very much for the presentation. You mentioned that you had 2,000 characters in the game.
Yes.
How did you manage to avoid any redundancy in the designs? Like, for example, did you have a rule like we will not use this clothes more than 100 times? Oh, too bad you used it, we already used it. How did you manage?
Yeah, so it is a framework, of course. So we couldn't, so if something was modeled, it was used. So actually, throughout the production, we had some meshes that we did want to get rid of. So some old models that weren't supposed to get into the game. For example, on the first dialogue demo, there was a plate armor, there was a mage robe. It actually didn't end up in the game. So what we did, because we also have a large team, and not only artists use those meshes and dress up characters, but also all the other teams, like scripters, when they build up the script situation or whatnot, they would throw in some characters, throw in some equipment on them. So what we did, we had this giant character art passes on everything, and if we needed to remove a mesh, we would find all of the references to this mesh on all of the character visuals, and then we would replace it. So this was one of the things. Another thing just generally helps you to make sure that you're not using the same thing over and over is making sure that you always do color variations. So you not only just assign the meshes in some kind of order of your preference, but you also customly select which leather color you want to pick for this character, which other color you want to pick for some other part. And then after all that is done, we also asked artists to play through some small area that they were assigned to for dress-up pass to make sure that none of the situations where like characters looking too similar or having same heads are staying too close to each other. So that's how we kept it at bay. So there were no automatic process to check, except we just could see where the mesh was used. So we would just, we had data, but like it still was about just loading the engine and loading the level and then looking, okay, so like this guy has this type of head and the next guy was this head standing like somewhere a few screens away, which was fine. But then if, the same type of civilian talks to, him, his brother, which has exactly the same visual, that was obviously a no-go, so we had to get rid of it. A lot of times we also had to just make sure that characters are dressed, because a lot of other departments would just place naked characters, and then I think it was in the sewers, and I think we only fixed it post-release, but there were a bunch of naked people just like lying dead in the sewers that nobody noticed because it was an area that like we rarely checked, and then we obviously got to fix it in the hotfix.
Thank you. I have a question, especially for the Dragonborn race.
Mm-hmm.
It's looking pretty different from all the other races, especially head-wise. How did you plan in advance for that, considering it was planned from the beginning, and like which amount of work did you put into it,
mm-hmm.
considering how different they are?
It's a very good question, actually. Thank you for it. So the Dragonborn indeed was the most costly race to make for us out of all of the racial lineup. And it was a struggle. So we started with concept art, and after probably half a year of iteration on the concept art front, we realized that we don't like any of the concept art. And we were nearing probably like 2 years before release mark. And then we also didn't know it was going to be 2 years of development then. But anyhow, we decided that it's time to give it to modelers regardless. So we just gathered the amount of like the huge pile of concept art that we had. We gave it to 3D modelers, and then we said, hey guys, so we don't like this. We like the vibes from here and from here, but we gotta make it better. And then there were multiple people who would like concept it a bit more in 3D. And while we were doing it, we figured out also the technicalities, right? So like we knew that we needed a base head with exactly the same UVs as a base, and then the attachment system. But we still needed to figure out, okay, how do we attach the attachment on different head shapes in a way where it would work on those different head shapes. And actually what we did was basically each head had, so there were a set of attachments and a set of heads, and each head had unique set of attachments that would only attach on its head, but they were like looking exactly the same. So we had, let's say, attachment A on head A, and then attachment A on head B. Right, so like they were different meshes. So it took us immense amount of work, also for Technimation as well, to figure out the lip sync to make sure that it's convincing. We looked up on a bunch of refs We kind of prototyped a bunch of things. We fixed the mouth shapes a couple of times, and then we also fixed the nose lengths as well, because we previously had like two types of like very long nose shape, was like very flat one, and then because we couldn't account for it further in cinematics, we reserved to have only like more similar nose lengths for them. So I think it's hard for me to say how much time did we spend in total on them, but each head took at least a month. Probably the first head took 3 months or so to make, and then additional time to animate and rig. The body took at least half a year to figure out. The shader, we also, obviously, we gotta have it customizable. So the shader, we had this very complex system for human, and then we were like, okay, we need to use the system on Dragonborns, but Dragonborn have both skin and scales. So we basically just took this complex system and multiplied it by 2. So that's the very, very different blended system for scales, very different blended system for skin. And that's how we made it work. So yeah, I mean, I'm afraid to check with our producer how much time did we spend, but it was a lot.
Thank you.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
You talked about feedbacks, iteration, and artistic freedom. How did you manage to say at some point, yes, we have enough variation, enough haircut, okay, only 16 green shades instead of color wheel, for example. How did you came to the conclusion that it was enough?
Mm-hmm. So I would say from time to time we would return to it. So we would let it sit for a while, right? So for example, we would add additional colors to our, let's say, like a couple of customization options, like to hair, let's say. And then we would let it sit for like 3 months, and then we would revisit. Or we would also talk to playtesters meanwhile, and then we would ask them like, hey, is it enough? Like, what do you feel? How do you feel about this? And then if for example, sometimes that was us who spotted, like it was clearly not enough, like you go into, let's say, makeup shades, and then there were like only 2 rows, looks very underwhelming, so we were like, okay, we need to add more. With the color wheel, it was more of a technical limitation, so we just couldn't afford to make it as a feature by then. But we would always want to have those swatches, because some players do prefer swatches over like dragging, like finding their perfect color. So we would kind of, yeah, do this for them in a way. But yeah, we don't know for sure if everything is enough. But if it looks like when you click on all colors and you go like, whoa, okay, then we think like, okay, yeah, that's fine then.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. Thank you very much for your talk. I was curious, considering illimited implementation capability, what would be the feature you wish you could have added, like unrestricted by the limitations of how to implement it?
Mm-hmm. I would want to add a lot of features, actually. So I think one of that almost got in would be iris customization. So it kind of was like almost on the plan, but it didn't happen. But I think that would be the first one on the list to like kind of to make. I would also kind of still wish to expand on the amount of head shapes that we given to the players. Also probably, yeah, that just because of the other tasks kind of didn't happen. But yeah, I think more of everything for sure. And then just, yeah, expanded features that would require extra textures, like, yeah, more eye customization, more split into how you can customize your makeup. So there is a lot. There is a lot that I would still add.
Thank you.
Just a question. Did you gather some anonymous data to know whether one aspect of the customization was preferred to another, for instance?
So we didn't know beforehand. So when you hand it to the player, you don't really have any data. So you can assume something. You're like, oh, I think this head or this hairstyle would be super popular, or this one. But when we shipped those patches, we actually by then had our data analytics in place. So if you consent to give us data, then we might, have a better picture of what people are picking. But then when we started having data come in, after each patch we would check which was the most popular playable race, which was the most popular hairstyle or face or this and that. I think that didn't really help us with our, not necessarily navigate us through which choices to make. Because it was obvious, it was this most standard, white male guy with a fancy hairstyle. That was the most popular guy usually. But sometimes we saw very interesting trends, like when we shipped, I think it was Sorcerer patch and Bard as well. The most popular race shifted from humans to half-elves. So that was very curious. And also, I think the most popular hairstyle that literally players used thousands of time was this drow hair. So that was everyone's favorite for sure. Crazy numbers. And then we also looked at the least popular stuff, which was most of the time more niche choices. And then sometimes we saw that it is just choices that not the majority players prefer, but they are very solid. And then sometimes we saw a technical problem, like maybe this choice wasn't made very well, or there was some kind of an issue with it. And that helped us kind of also bug fix it in a way. So we were like, okay, this hair is not picked because it was just not looking that great because of this, and then we would put in plan that we'll need to fix it.
Thank you.
Hello. Sorry, I hope the question is not too private. But what was the relationship with Wizard of the Coast? And were they much more hands-off or hands-on on the characters and the creation of the world building?
Mm-hmm. So early on, I think it was planned that they're going to be a little bit of a hands-on, but we soon realized that they're very hands-off. So they gave us all of the freedom in the world that we could have. We didn't have to check with them almost on anything. So it was more for, I think, mostly our CEO handled communication, and it mostly happened as him presenting them a patch or the state of the game as a whole, rather than then hunting down individual visuals. So that didn't happen. But what we knew from the start is that we needed to stay true to some of the canon things. So let's say the amount of limbs Beholder can have, or the amount of eyes, or some stuff things like that. But yeah, essentially they weren't really hands-on, and we didn't get much feedback, so they just were judging the project as a whole. And then as art department, we were figuring it out for ourselves. However, they did give us all of the access to all of the D&D books and a bunch of art that was made. So that also served as really nice base. So whenever we were looking for a reference or inspiration, we would gather first everything that was made or created by Wizards and are in the books. We would get all of the lore, the info, and we had a bunch to kickstart the creation process. And then, then we would obviously make it something of our own.
Thank you.
No more questions?
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much, guys, for joining. I hope you liked it.